as I talked about with my Joey Bosa scouting report, there are those certain prospects before their last season at college that are getting all the attention and all the buzz, and you'll see all the mock drafts have them as a top 3 pick, top 5 pick, no worse than top 10 pick. They pick out certain traits and certain characteristics and fall in love with them, and that's what you have to go off of. And frankly, very early on in the draft process, a lot of times that is all that you have to go off of. So in some ways, I don't blame the NFL draft media for sometimes pumping up and highly rating certain guys where it maybe doesn't match the reality of who they are as a prospect. Now, sometimes that can happen in part two because you've been hearing about how these guys are the next big thing coming out of high school. So then you've got 3 years of college and you're still following that kind of propaganda cycle about what they could be at the NFL level because they were dominant in high school. You saw flashes of dominance in college. You think they could do the same thing at the NFL level. And, that might not necessarily be the reality. When I look at Robert Nkemdiche, the 6'4", 285, 290-pound defensive lineman, the junior from Ole Miss, you're talking about a guy that was the #1 recruit in the 2013 recruiting class. He was a big get for Ole Miss, part of that great recruiting class with guys like Laremy Tunsil and Laquan Treadwell. But he was the crown jewel. He was the creme de la creme. And he's been a guy that over the past several months, almost for a year now, people have been talking about how he's a surefire top 2, top 3, top 5, no worse than top 10 pick. And I've never really gotten that. I've never really understood that. And I'll kind of explain to you why now. Now, I can see in terms of the strengths and the positives of his game, what people fall in love with when they watch an Ole Miss game or they pop in some film of Robert Nkemdiche. You're talking about a guy with great snap recognition. I mean, oftentimes I would see him on the defensive line for Ole Miss, and he was the first guy off the ball, and he was the first guy off the ball with a purpose and with a quickness. This guy is, for 285, 290 pounds, he is incredibly explosive. I mean, his initial burst, his initial quickness is outstanding. He has the initial burst and quickness of an outside linebacker, and that's not hyperbole. That's truth. This guy has explosiveness for days. In terms of explosiveness off of the snap recognition, in that respect alone, it's very reminiscent to me of Aaron Donald when he was at Pittsburgh. I mean, just a guy that was consistently the first off of the snap, a guy that was so explosive off of the initial snap, and oftentimes that would be enough, regardless of technique or anything else, to be able to win his one-on-one matchup, to be able to get to the spot that he needed to get to, because, again, he was so quick off of the ball, an offensive lineman was already out of position as soon as the ball was snapped. When I look at Nkemdiche, another thing I really like about him is his straight line athleticism. Again, talking about that initial quickness, that burst, that explosiveness. A guy that really is athletic overall for 290 pounds, in particular when he's heading in a north-south type of direction. This is a guy who had a nose for consistently being able to break down the pocket, to get into the backfield, to create penetration. I mean, just consistently did that. And when you have teams that are looking for, let's say, a 3-technique tackle in a cover 2 system or in a 4-3 system, they're looking for a guy like a Nkemdiche who could consistently get into the backfield, that generate that upfield penetration up the middle. People will talk about penetration off of the edge being the biggest thing, especially when you see guys like DeMarcus Ware and in particular Von Miller and what they did to the Carolina Panthers in the Super Bowl, and that's great. But we forget about the fact that guys like Derek Wolfe and Malik Jackson were getting pass rush up the middle as well. And in general, if you can get that pass rush up the middle, man, that is so disruptive to opposing offenses because it really affects what that quarterback can do. They have to be able to recognize that and scramble out quickly, and in some ways are already eliminating half of the field. Whereas if you get edge penetration, a lot of times that penetration could go too far. The quarterback can either step up or step over to one side or step up and over. And he's still got the entire field to work with. Sometimes I would rather have interior penetration than edge penetration. Oh, that sounded really bad. But nonetheless, Nkemdiche can do that in great abundance. Had a great nose for it. I like his positional flexibility, too. I can envision him in multiple roles in a 4-3 defense. I can envision him in multiple roles in not only a 4-3, but a 3-4 as well. Nkemdiche's a guy, if you lost 10, 15 pounds, he's so freaking athletic in a straight line since it's so sudden and quick that he's a guy that could even play as a bigger 3-4 outside linebacker, and I mean that. Because he's got flexibility all over the place. So you could take a guy. You can envision him being able to play at times in many different roles, even if he doesn't have one that really stands out a cut above the rest. And I also like his ability as a tackler. Here is a guy that when he gets his hands on somebody, to me, traditionally finished. And sometimes he could be a very punishing tackler. He can make some big-time hits. I mean, here's a guy that you have to worry about. Here's a guy that, in theory, you could have to think about because he could clock you. He could really clock you. So I can see again why people fall in love with him as a prospect, because those things are really impressive. You know, those athletic traits, and you look at him from an athletic standpoint, size, athleticism, all of that. You know, in theory, he should be a dominant force. And you know, no offense to Bosa or anybody else, but Nkemdiche should be clearly the #1 defensive prospect in this draft, and maybe the #1 overall prospect in this draft. But the reality is, he just isn't. There are a lot of reasons for that. #1, body position. Here's a guy that sometimes he can try to penetrate so quickly that he gets his body in bad positions. He doesn't, you know, always utilize the best leverage, in my opinion. But he can get himself completely blown out of plays just by guys having to guide him. They don't even realize to block him. They just guide him and kind of set him off in a different direction. You know, here's a guy that could turn his shoulders too severely, too quickly. You know, here's a guy at times that I thought could get a little OC, a little out of control. You know, didn't always have the best balance underneath him. And again, that body position, you know, you could go up against NFL linemen that are stronger and quicker, even on the interior, and they're going to have a field day with that. Lateral athleticism, you know, I think this comes into the fact that you see him and he doesn't finish the plays that you think he does. He gets into the backfield a lot, but he doesn't finish enough plays. And that's a big concern too, because yeah, it's great to get that penetration. Yeah, it's great for that guy to get in the backfield that much. But eventually NFL teams can game plan around that. Yeah, he'll get there, but he's not going to finish. Yeah, he'll get there, but he's not going to do anything. So he's not really much of a threat. And that's a legitimate concern. I think that partially comes into his lack of hip flexibility and lateral athleticism. Like I said, north-south, really athletic guy. East-west, when he has to change direction, he has to shift his body weight, not so much. And I think you see that lack of hip flexibility and that lack of lateral athleticism a lot of times when he gets into the backfield and he ends up blowing right by the quarterback, or if the running back stops at all, he's going right by him, and you'll have Nkemdiche just got a hand on him and he's going 2 yards past. You know, that's a real concern for me because, again, what good does it do to consistently get the penetration if he can't finish the plays? And then I look at his pass rush ability, and I don't see a lot of it, frankly. A lot of times his pass rush comes from just beating somebody off of the snap with his snap recognition and his explosiveness. But pass rush moves, pretty much non-existent. Let's be honest. He's not a natural pass rusher, and he does not have much of a natural pass rush repertoire for a guy that should be so strong. He should be a better bull rusher as a pass rusher than he is. He should be better at using rip and swim moves than he is. Here's a guy that also, with that explosiveness and initial quickness, especially on the inside, and even when you line him up outside, should have a devastating spin move, and I just never saw that out of him. And so, again, when you're talking about a guy like him with that type of athleticism, and you're questioning his pass rush ability, is that really a top-flight prospect, and is that a guy you really want to take high? Especially when you look at, to me, his inconsistency of effort. There are times where Nkemdiche could be the best player on the field, and nobody's close, and nobody can do a damn thing about it. But there are other times where it seems like Nkemdiche just doesn't care and he's not trying. And he wants the recognition and attention for being a dominant player, but he doesn't always want to put forth the effort for being a dominant player. And if I'm going to bury certain parts of Bosa's NFL stock because of his lack of motor and consistent effort, I'm going to do the same thing with Nkemdiche because, again, it's a similar problem. Yeah, the same thing with both guys. I think inconsistent effort at times, man, played their asses off. Other times, man, non-existent. Where the hell did they go? And look at them loafing. Look at them loafing. But when it comes to Nkemdiche, I think the single biggest question you have to have about him are the off-the-field issues, and they are significant. There's been buzz about the fact that he wasn't a very good locker room presence to begin with. There's also the worry about his brother Denzel and how much of a knucklehead he is. And sorry, even if I don't know the person personally, once they get into certain situations and certain trouble, they are knuckleheads. That's just the way it is. You don't have to know me to know if I was getting arrested for this or that, then I'm probably a knucklehead. Well, Denzel Nkemdiche is a knucklehead. And his brother, Robert Nkemdiche, can be led by him, and being led by a knucklehead can lead to Robert doing knucklehead things, and he's done some knucklehead things off the field. Most recently, that incident in the hotel in, I think it was Atlanta, where he's found with weed, and he's falling out of windows, he gets suspended for the bowl game. I mean, this is a guy you really have to take some major reservations about drafting high, because that personal makeup, that off-the-field stuff, could be a significant burden to him ever reaching his full potential as an NFL player. You know, if you're going to be in that type of position, you're going into your last college game knowing that people are already questioning you and your off-the-field stuff, and now you're going to sit there and have weed in your hotel room and you're falling out of hotel windows. Is that the type of guy that you really want in your locker room? Is that the type of guy that you really envision taking his job in the NFL seriously? Is this the type of guy that you think is really going to be a professional? Serious questions. In terms of an NFL comparison, like I said before, in terms of his snap recognition, his initial burst and explosiveness off the ball, he reminds me of Aaron Donald, but that's the end of that comparison, I assure you. In terms of all-around prospect, in terms of similarities in many different facets, I look at Sheldon Richardson of the New York Jets. Two guys with great initial burst. Straight line athleticism for days. Impressive stuff. Guys that are scheme versatile that can play both in the 4-3 and the 3-4. Two guys that demonstrated in college a consistent ability to get into the backfield and be potentially disruptors and change offenses in what they do because of their ability to consistently generate pressure up the middle. Two guys that were really, really highly recruited, top of their recruiting class type of guys, but still raw and still need a lot of work on their technique. I think Richardson was more ready for the NFL level than Nkemdiche is, and I think Richardson was most certainly a more well-polished and well-rounded pass rusher than Nkemdiche, but they were both guys that were still raw, and both of them have off-the-field questions that will be huge in terms of evaluating them as prospects and ultimately determining what type of success they do or don't enjoy at the NFL level. We forget about Sheldon Richardson. He had some issues at college. The guy started off at a junior college. Then he came to Missouri, and he got into some off-the-field trouble there, and now he's gotten into some off-the-field trouble at the NFL level. Nkemdiche, significant off-the-field questions about him just at Ole Miss. What happens now when you're looking at investing millions of guaranteed dollars into a guy for the next several years, putting a first-round pick on a guy like that? I don't know about this. Again, this is a massively hyped prospect in terms of overall. Again, I really like his explosiveness. His athleticism, I should say, especially in a straight line. The fact that he has a nose, it seems like, for getting into the backfield. He can be a disruptor getting up the field. I mean, these are the types of traits that I should love as a prospect. These are the type of traits that should get a guy taken very, very high because guys of this size just don't usually have that type of initial burst, explosiveness, quickness. I mean, just incredible stuff. And physically, he looks the part. He's pretty well balanced out in terms of how he carries his weight. So I like that in terms of he's not a top-heavy guy or a bottom-heavy guy. He could always use more muscle. You can always use more muscle, though. Who couldn't use more muscle? I mean, seriously. But I like the way that his body is structured in terms of the balance that it has, in terms of the strength being distributed evenly between the upper and lower body. Look at me, I'm kinesiologist or some shit like that. But I hate his effort level. I think it's too inconsistent. I think he has a better overall level than Joey Bosa because at times I saw Nkemdiche play with a pure fire up his ass that even when Bosa tries, I don't ever see that pure fire up his ass. I could see at times Nkemdiche the past couple of years, he would get that fire up his ass and he would just take a play over. He would just absolutely do it. But he's not a natural pass rusher. He needs a lot of work in terms of expanding his pass rush repertoire. Is he a guy that's really going to be able to bull rush guards and centers at the NFL level? I don't know if he's strong enough to do that. And even with that initial burst and explosiveness, again, it's different when you do it at college as opposed to the NFL level. He doesn't finish nearly enough plays for my liking. Again, what good does it do if a guy can consistently get in the backfield if he's not making game-changing plays? Because in part, sometimes, if he's getting that upfield penetration, but he doesn't finish, what can happen? It's opening up a big hole behind him, and that could be a serious concern. His positional versatility is appealing, but in terms of a prospect, throughout the entire year, if you follow me on here, you follow me on Twitter, I've consistently talked about how I felt he was an overrated prospect just from on the field alone. Too far from a finished product to be talked about as a top 5 pick. And this foolishness should have stopped about halfway through the season. To me, from a pure talent standpoint, he's maybe a late first to early second round pick in terms of on the field. Now, he's a guy that late first, early second round talent could end up being a top 10 guy in 3, 4, 5 years. No question about it. Because that upside is there. The upside is tremendous. And you could argue in terms of pure upside, he has as much upside as any of the defensive linemen in this draft class. And again, it's a very good draft for defensive linemen. But his upside could be as high as anybody's, maybe the highest, and maybe by a good margin. But in terms of off the field, man, he's a player. If I'm running a team, I don't even know if I have him on my draft board. He's gotten into all these troubles and all these issues. This is too talented of a draft class at that position to be taking a gamble on that guy high when you got so many other guys that have decent upside themselves, but aren't the mess off the field and in their personal lives that like Nkemdiche seems to be. So he could be a star, or he could be the type of knucklehead that gets himself into so much trouble that he runs himself out of the league in 3 to 4 years. Either is a possibility. He could be a multiple-time Pro Bowler, or he could be one of those epic draft busts and be out of the league by the time he's 24, 25. That's very, very possible. To me, and this is for me, I think his real draft range is somewhere between the top 25 to round 3. I think there's a wide variance. Some teams are going to have him off of their draft board. Some teams aren't going to care as much about the off-the-field crap, and they're going to be desperate for that type of athleticism on the interior, so they're going to put him higher up on the board. But I think all this talk about him being a top 10 pick is complete craziness, and maybe I'll end up being wrong. But I still think it's complete craziness because the hype just doesn't match the reality on the field. And I think that most NFL front offices, most NFL scouting departments, most GMs view Nkemdiche as one of those traditional yearly editions of overrated as fuck draft prospects by the NFL draft media. I think there's no question about it. He's a day 3 pick for me. Yes, he's got upside. And yes, he's got athletic potential. But he's a freaking mess off the field. And yes, you can pass judgment on people like that if you don't know them personally based off of the situations they put themselves in and the people that they surround themselves with. Nkemdiche is a fucking mess off the field. And you have to have serious reservations and concerns about giving this guy a shit ton of money and in part trying to make him a face of your franchise, especially if you're investing a high first-round pick in the guy. I'm not gambling on him with anything more than a 4th-round pick. Because if he's a day 3 pick and he washes out, who cares? If he's a day 3 pick and he ends up achieving his massive potential, then, man, I look like a freaking genius. Either way, it's a win-win-win. You talk about drafting a guy like this, even in the back half of round 1, I just think it's too risky. And I think there are too many things that could potentially go. And ultimately, he'll be that type of guy that if he was drafted in the tail end portion of round 1, and he stayed out of trouble off the field, he'll make a lot of people like me look stupid because he'll end up playing like a top 10, top 15 guy in this draft class. And again, like I mentioned, that potential is there. I think in terms of pure, unadulterated, unfiltered potential, he has the most potential of any defensive player in this entire draft class. But that doesn't mean that I'm taking him that high. Just too risky, too raw, too many areas that need work, too many red flags and major areas of concern, that make me really pause about this guy. I still expect that he'll be taken on day 2 somewhere. Might be round 2, might be round 3. Call me wrong if you want. We'll ultimately see what happens or not. I'd expect in terms of the on-the-field stuff, if he goes to the combine, he's probably going to blow it up there. But then it's all going to be about the interviews. It's all going to be about that behind-the-scenes crap. And that's where the problem could really come into play, and that's where he could really hurt his draft stock the most. I'd be surprised, frankly, if it didn't happen because of all the off-the-field crap. Again, I think he's been one of those yearly editions of overrated draft prospects that has potential, but the hype most certainly does not match the reality of the player that he actually is and the prospect that he actually is.